Thanks for tuning in. This is the Brain Software Podcast, coming to you from the Hypnotic World Epicenter, Toronto, Canada. I'm Chris Thompson, and today, Mike Mandel and I talk about the top 10 hypnotists of all time.
The cathode ray tube has become the retina of the mind's eye. Therefore, the television is part of the physical structure of the brain. Therefore, whatever happens on television is perceived as raw experience. Therefore, television is reality. And reality is less than television. Right, Mr. Thompson?
You better believe it, Captain Obvious. But there's something that's got me puzzled. Whatever happened to that old tranquility we used to know? These are days of victory! So let's welcome a man who's recently taken up Jin Shinjitsu. A man with real plenary dispersions. And the only hypnotist you'll ever need other than me. Direct from a keynote in Minden, Ontario.
Thank you.
Where he addressed the board of directors of the Shizjig Corporation. Mike Mandel!
Yes, Chris, what a profound rush into the microphone that was. I just
was
enjoyed
amazing.
That immensely, man.
Really did.
So what's up? It's a rainy day here in Hypno East.
Yeah, we are recording this at the tail end of August 2019. We have just returned, a week ago, we've returned from Las Vegas, where we spent our fifth year in a row attending the Hypnothoughts live conference that all of you listening have heard us talk about in gladiative fashion on this podcast many times. It was the best Hypnothoughts live ever.
Oh man, kudos to Richard Clark and Scott Sandlin and
Stephanie and all the help.
Crew. They did an absolutely phenomenal job, and the Orleans has had a bit of renovation as well. It was just a joy to be there for 6 nights, hanging out with our peeps, meeting Daniel Geddes, who we'd never met in person. Who's
shout out to Daniel Geddes.
Shout out to you, Scro.
I mean, it was just a blast. And all the best trainers in the world pretty well were there. Carl Smith, Melissa Tears, James Tripp, Freddie Jackman. Anthony wasn't there, unfortunately. But man, oh man, what a blast.
It was amazing. And Mike, you were the keynote speaker.
Yes.
You were handpicked by Scott and the gang. And I have seen you do a lot of public speaking, a lot of keynote speeches. And no mistake in saying this, no exaggeration in saying this. That was by far the best keynote I have ever seen.
Oh, thanks, buddy.
The structure.
I said to my wife, I think it was my finest work because I wrote it out, I mind mapped it, I timed it to 30 minutes, and I don't think anyone had ever done a keynote that I've ever heard of before that was in hypnotic loops. So the entire keynote was hypnotic and designed that way.
It was crazy awesome, and people were just mind blown listening. And when they realized the structure of what you were doing, the whole audience was essentially mesmerized. Normally, there's a bit of chatter at the back of the room. There was nothing you could hear a pin drop.
It was dead silent. I couldn't believe it. And then they were on their feet just in an instant.
It was amazing. I was thrilled with it.
It was a great blessing for me, and I'm glad people got it. And you said it's going to be available for our students, isn't it?
Yeah, actually, well, we have to decide what we want to do. Do we want to make it available to anyone, anywhere? Put it on. We'll see. But for sure, if you're in the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy, you will be able to watch it. Yes. It's actually, I just spoke with, so our good friend Ari, who did a lot of video work for us in Vegas, he's going to be editing the whole thing. It'll be ready probably within a few weeks of this podcast going live.
Now, another thing about Hypnothoughts that I just want to mention, I want to give a shout out to James Hazelrigg, our good friend, great storyteller, excellent hypnotist, smart as hell.
And we've had him on this podcast.
Had him on the podcast
to talk about Hypnosis. That's right.
I bought one of the tri-pendulums from him, and it is freaking amazing. If you've never seen these things, it's a stick about 18 inches long, a dowel, and hanging from the stick are 3 different pendulums, all made of different colored crystals, and they're all different lengths, so they have different amplitudes and periods. And you hold this in your hands in front of you horizontally, and you concentrate on any one of the 3 pendulums, and it begins to
starts
swing.
moving.
And it's great for teaching.
It proves the power of ideomotor work. In fact, I think it was last night or this morning, I was reading a post from our other good friend, Kevin Cole, who's a hypnotherapist who lives in Las Vegas.
Right.
And he had mentioned that there was a client of his that had I won't even go into detail in case there's any privacy issues. And
he didn't sweat the story.
He didn't post a lot of details. He kept it very careful for the privacy of the client. But the client had a particular problem that had been affecting her for a very long time, and he used the tripendulum as part of the work.
Ooh,
and got an
that's
amazing result. So cheers to you, Kevin, for the awesome work that you're doing.
Excellent.
All right, so we're gonna move on here.
What's coming up?
Yeah, first of all, before we talk about what's coming up, let's talk about what this podcast is going to be about. We're going to do a cool discussion. This was your idea, Mike. We're going to do some top 10 lists in these next few episodes. We're starting with an episode on the top 10 hypnotists of all time, the greatest hypnotists of all time. Now, it's our own list, and we will get into a discussion.
So naturally, I'm at the top of the list.
No,
just kidding.
You're not even on it.
Not even on it.
And I'm not on it either, you bastard.
Well, if I'm not on it, you're sure as hell not going to be on it, you bastard.
Yeah, it's anyway, we're going to have some good chat about this. Hopefully, you guys will get some real good value and have some fun with it. But that said, there's some good stuff coming up. I want to make sure I draw your attention to Mike Mandel, hypnosis.com/events, because what is coming up, the most near to date, that's not even correct language.
Coming up next.
Thank you, Mike. Coffee, not enough coffee. Coming up next, we have in October, Michael C. Anthony doing a class as our next guest trainer in Toronto. It's October 19th and 20th, so it's a Saturday, Sunday, tremendous weekend of stage hypnosis, presentation skills, group hypnosis skills. Just going to be fantastic. He's going to teach some mentalism. He's basically going to take anybody at any skill level and install upon you, within you, a lot of presentation capabilities that will make you more confident, either just doing group demonstrations, or it'll make your hypnosis with clients more effective because you will have this element of fascination that you can bring into your session.
It's going to be awesome, man, because, I've seen him work. He's one of our best friends. You and him are my two best friends in the world. And he's such a natural entertainer, but he's a brilliant mentalist, a brilliant stage hypnotist, and people will get great skill sets if they're presenters and want to be more congruent. If they want to throw a bit of mentalism into a presentation, he's going to be unpacking some of the effects he actually uses on stage.
Oh yeah, these are real effects from his shows.
Yeah,
that's
phenomenal.
The thing. So MikeMandelHypnosis.com/events, or if you just want to jump to the page about Michael C. Anthony, it's MikeMandelHypnosis.com/MC. And he actually shot about a 3-minute video to discuss what he's going to be teaching. It's on that page, so check it out. And now we're going to move on.
Let's go to the think tank words, and I've got 3 great ones that were spewed out of the machine, the damnable machine, Mr. Thompson.
That's awesome.
The first one is arrest.
Arrest.
The second is explode, and the third one is connections.
Connections.
What do you make of that?
Oh, man. Okay, so weirdly, nothing is just coming right to mind, but arrest, you have 2 definitions here. To stop.
Right.
I guess that's what to arrest somebody, like if a police is arresting someone, that is to stop them. Same definition. To stop. Explode and connections.
We'll go back to arrest. When you think about stopping, I also see arrest as something being taken captive.
Yeah.
And to me, that speaks of learning as well. Learning something, repeating it until you make it your own. You take the idea, the concept, the skill set captive.
Yeah.
You arrest it and make it work for you by repetition and practice, getting good at stuff.
And I'm also thinking arrest to cease doing that which is not useful in your life.
Nice.
So encapsulate, imagine putting inside of some jail cell all the crap that you have been doing that is not useful, whether it be eating, whether it be behavior patterns, whether it be just how you're spending your time.
Just lock that pecker up.
Put that stuff in a jail cell and allow that to then explode your new progress using all that free time that you now have.
Ooh.
And make new connections and
so
learning and progress.
You're putting them in a jail cell, but you're saying allow it to explode. So really, Chris, it's death row.
Yeah.
We're putting the things in frickin' death row.
Put the garbage in a jail cell and let the good stuff explode to fill the void that exists because you now have all this extra time, extra space.
Buddy, and when they eventually hang you, I will put this in your eulogy.
Okay, thank you, buddy. Thank you.
Now, explode is great because to me, that always comes back to our chain reaction creativity. Just the whole idea of ideas blowing wide open. Every time we get new ideas, good ideas, they lead to other good ideas. There's no need to be stagnant.
And bad ideas lead to other bad ideas, Mike.
Yes, they do, Chris. And eventually they lead to good ideas if you pursue them far enough down death row.
Oh, that's funny.
It's about connection, man.
Yes.
Connection. What other criminals in death row are you going to make friends with?
Yeah.
You're just looking at me saying, yeah.
Because you keep saying connection.
Well, it's just very hard for me to talk to Chris right now because he's just buzzed his hair shorter and shorter, and it looks freaking amazing. He's a scary looking dude now, but I feel like I'm sitting next to a convict.
Actually, so let's have a quick chat about this. This is kind of funny.
Oh, the incremental change?
Yeah, so I told my wife, I said, when I come home from Las Vegas, I'm cutting my hair short. I'm going to buzz it down to a number 2. Now, she didn't want me to do it, but I had a particular, we won't even go into the details, but I wanted to cut it for a particular reason.
Yeah.
And she was not a big fan of it. But I thought, okay, what I really want to do is buzz it down to a number 1, which is about half the number 2.
The Jason Statham look.
It's super short. And me being blonde, when I cut it that short, it essentially makes me look bald. Because if you have darker hair, you can kind of tell, okay, it's a buzz cut.
Yeah.
From a distance, I just look like I have nothing on my head whatsoever, just skin, because it's blonde. So I shaved it down to a 2. And then I said I was going to do a 1, and she was objecting. No, I don't want you. Now, if she ever listens to this podcast, she'll figure it out, I guess. But what I did is I took my clippers that have increments on them. So if I put the number 1 attachment on, I can extend it out, and there are 5 increments. So I call them A, B, C, D, and E. And what I did is about a few days after the number 2, I put the 1 on it, I extended it all the way to level E, and I shaved it down. So it's just a tiny bit shorter than a 2.
Yeah.
Then a couple of days later, I put it on level D. And it's, a tiny bit.
You really have done it incrementally. Yeah. I thought you just did 2 jumps. Okay.
No, and it's a tiny bit shorter than 1E, right? Each tiny bit, like if I did that immediately, you'd think, wow, that's definitely not a 2. It's much shorter. But and I thought she would notice for sure. She's the type of person who notices every little thing. Like if something is in a different position on a counter, or, if literally anything that is not quite in its place, she will notice. She has amazing calibration skills. And I thought, with her calibration skills, there's no way that she will not notice this.
Yeah.
And yet, she didn't. So I'm very surprised. I might go down to 1C tomorrow.
Well, when you do, let me give you a bit of advice here. Do you remember Dennis the Menace comics, the little blonde kid?
Yes, I do.
Now, those of you who are Brits who are listening, we have a huge listening audience in Britain. The English Dennis the Menace was the original, and he was always getting, smacked with a slipper by his dad at the end of every episode. That was a much more violent, funny one, to my way of thinking. The North American Dennis the Menace was this cute little kid with blonde hair, and he had a rooster tail. His hair would stick up at the back. I want you to know, you have missed turn your head, you missed a tiny, tiny tuft here. You have a microscopic rooster tail right there.
Oh, he's pulling on my hair. I don't think I
am. No, you do, buddy.
I have
Serious,
to check.
I'm doing the hand. Serious.
Okay.
When you buzz it back, make sure you hit it from every freaking angle, or you will miss that.
Okay.
And people will be looking at you saying, Dennis the Menace.
That is the funny thing of cutting your own hair. You can't really tell.
Which really begs the question, what has all of this got to do with hypnosis?
Yeah, it's nothing.
So let's move on.
Let's move on. All right. So we're going to go through our top 10 greatest hypnotists of all time.
Now, this is an arbitrary list. There's many, many men and women, actually, who could be on this list.
Right.
But I've picked these 10 for specific reasons. Some of them are actually a double.
And it's my first time looking at this list. So the very first name, I'm kind of shocked to see at the very top of the list, Franz Anton Mesmer.
Okay, well, let me tell you, the one I was going to put at the beginning of the list takes us back to 1000 AD. I was initially going to put Edward the Confessor.
Oh, right.
Because of the esteemed bagman of Edward the Confessor, and also because he was the first one to use prestige with a royal touch. That's really been well documented. But
shout out to Richard White. Prestige!
Shout out to Richard White. Prestige, yes. We had, by the way, in Las Vegas, we had 2 new investitures in the bagman of Edward the Confessor. Do you know who they were?
No.
Negender?
Oh, yeah. Negender. Good to...
India via Ukraine. And... Stephen Blake.
Oh, fantastic.
They both have passed.
Okay, fantastic.
Now,
so
Franz
to
Anton Mesmer, 1700s. I picked him because here was a man who approached the entire field from a medical background. Now, his medicine was a bit woo-woo. He had written a paper on how the planets influence physical ailments and so on, and had published this.
So he intended it to be scientific, even though it was complete bunk.
Yes. In fact, what we see with Mesmer again and again is the failure to apply Occam's razor. Whereas, Occam's razor is the idea that the explanation that requires the fewest new
assumptions or hypotheses
is the most likely one to be true.
Right.
And Mesmer, although I've said he contributed nothing to the art, what I really mean is
nothing to the science.
Right, nothing to the science of hypnosis.
He contributed a lot to the growing interest in hypnosis.
He contributed a lot not only to the interest, but to the theatricality of it.
Right.
Here's a guy who, when he had studied with Maximilian Hell, was doing the bloodletting and so on, and was using magnetism to stop the bleeding when they do bloodletting, which was a cure for everything back then, he one day didn't have his magnets and improvised and grabbed a wooden pointer and waved it over his wrist. In fact, if you want to look at this stuff in depth, I recommend the book by Dr. John C. Hughes on the history of hypnosis. A whole book on it that's fascinating. Mesmer draws the conclusion, not that, because the bleeding stopped. He draws the conclusion, it's magnetic currents in me.
Yeah,
so,
he figured that it was him. Now, just to back up for a moment, for those listening who don't know what bloodletting is, because I certainly didn't when many years ago you lectured about this in the hypnosis class I took with you way back in the early 2000s. But bloodletting was, they thought that you had too much blood, and if you had a sickness of some sort, they could cut open your veins, take a pint of blood, and you'd get better.
In fact, they believed, going back to the Greeks, that you had 4 types of humors or vapors in your body: melancholic, sanguine, which was blood, all these different humors, choleric, running through your blood or through your body. And if you had too much sanguine humor, it was bad for you. In other words, too much blood.
So you had to take blood out, hence bloodletting. So they'd cut open your vein.
Yeah.
And then they would wave these lodestones.
Well, Maximilian Hell
Hell would wave these magnetic lodestones over the open wound. And because of the hypnotic effect that he was inducing in the subject, the blood would stop.
Platelets would aggregate, form a clot. Well, in fact, we said, barbers were the surgeons of the day, and they set bones and stuff. And barbers would do a lot of bloodletting. You'd go in and say short back and sides, trim the goatee, and take a pint of blood. Well, you're right. Yeah. And so they would hold the stick. He'd hold a stick while they opened the vein with a razor, and the stick would get all gory and put people off. So they'd wrap it with a white bandage. That's the barber's pole that was outside barber
So
shops.
Mesmer was doing this, and one day forgot his lodestones and used a stick or whatever, something else. Pointer. Since it worked, obviously, because the suggestion is still there, he concluded, it's me. I am Magneto Boy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he got into the theatrics of it and drew huge interest. He would do seances, as he called them, and not in the talking to the dead, but he did seances where he gathered people. This would be, Ravine. Yeah. In Paris. Paris was the center of hypnosis back then. And he moved from Vienna to Paris, and he'd have a lot of people sitting around what he called a baquette, which was a shallow tub. He'd fill it with iron filings, wine bottles, iron rods. People would sit around, hold on to these. They'd be linked by a rope. He would come in wearing a turban and robes and waving a freaking iron wand, and they have incense burning. Yeah. And the atmosphere was so conducive to expectation that he was seeding suggestions. When he came in to touch people with this wand, this rod, they'd convulse and do the funky chicken and would often get better if their disease was psychogenic. But he persisted in thinking he had magnetic currents, and he resisted all attempts, including that by the Royal Commission of Louis XVI, to show that this was nothing but imagination triggering something else. Now, we know hypnosis is more than imagination because of the changes that can be seen in a brain with a functional MRI, whatever. But he made it accessible to people. He got people fascinated, and he created this immense wave of interest in mesmerism, or animal magnetism, as they called it.
Okay, so basically that's why he's on the list, not because he contributed anything of note scientifically, but because he brought interest and attention and the theatrics. He was probably the guy.
He was the guy at the time.
All right.
Now, in fact, it was up to one of his students, Marquis de Puysegur, who determined came up with the term somnambulism. So he's not on the list because he came up with a term, and I don't think it's that important.
All right.
But James Esdale is
so
second
next
on my
two.
list.
All right. James Esdale.
Now, Esdale was a Scottish British Army surgeon
who was performing mesmerism.
He got a contract with the East India Tea Company, which was actually taken over by the British government in India.
1800s, right?
Yes. Early 1800s, mid 1800s. They would ship casks of tea from India to Britain. There was a huge market for this, and the Bostonians wound up throwing it in the harbor.
Of course they did.
Which my father never forgave them. Anyway, Esdale he got a 20-year contract in Calcutta, India. He hated it from the moment he arrived. He hated the malaria, he hated the fevers, he hated the weather, he hated the food, he hated everything. But he was under contract. And the day he left, he was thrilled. But in that 20 years, he began applying largely his own methods of animal magnetism. Again, magnetic passes over the body, putting people in trance.
He was a surgeon, right?
He was a surgeon. And realized back in those days, when you did complex surgery, 50% of your patients would
Chance
die.
of
50%.
death was high because of shock, right?
Shock and bleeding.
Yeah.
Post-operative trauma. And so when Esdale began doing mesmerism, even doing things like amputating limbs with no pain, he reduced the mortality rate to something like 8%. Now,
Right,
this is
which is a massive
ether
improvement.
and chloroform were just going to be coming in shortly after this as anesthetic. In fact, they had overdoses and killed people too. And he documented this flawlessly. He did thousands of operations, 300 serious ones. In fact, Chris, the 80-pound testicular tumor, I have looked it up, and it is now said that it was a 110-pound testicular tumor, greater than the body weight of the man without it.
It's pretty nuts. In fact, so his book, Mesmerism in India, is available. If you Google search it, you can find the PDF. You can find it in PDF format, I believe, on Google in Google Books, because it's so old. And I checked this because when you told this story in class that, he removed an 80-pound testicular tumor, I thought that's absurd, right?
Yeah.
And as I've learned over the years, when you're telling these stories, usually you're understating the truth. And I've looked it up, and he had done several of these. It wasn't just one.
This particular one, this 110-pound testicular tumor, this was due to something called elephantiasis. And elephantiasis was a parasitic infection of the testicles. Not the sort of thing that one wants to get. I mean, this is way beyond your typical jockey. You're not going to going to,
It's amazing how this has become a recurrent theme in our podcast.
You pick up a can of Cruex and let's spray. Oh, good for elephantiasis. Not. So anyway, when Mesmer put this guy out with his mesmeric passes, he also trained other people to do it, because it would sometimes take him 2 hours to get them into the level he wanted. He then tied this off, he made the incision, and the blood gushed out of this guy's scrotal region, the toilet area. You're laughing, buddy. You're laughing, and you look like a convict. And there's a lot of scary stuff going on in this studio right now. But he quickly stanched it. He got it to stop bleeding through his mesmeric passes. And the man recovered and had no ill effects and no infection.
Amazing.
So when Esdale went back to London and was unable to get this to work for the Royal Society of Surgeons Royal College of Surgeons in London, think about it. India was this hotbed of mysticism and open-mindedness. You get to that bastard Esdale with his idiotic ideas. It was very much that sort of thing. He couldn't get anything to work, but he still held on to the animal magnetism theory.
Okay, so Esdale is on the list simply because he removed testicular tumors.
Because of the work he did with surgery, he showed what a powerful modality it was.
He unequivocally proved that this stuff is useful in the medical field.
When you keep talking, I'll have a sip of coffee.
Very cool. Ordinary coffee. All right, we're going to move on. Number 3 on the list is James Braid.
Okay, James Braid in Manchester, England, where I'm from.
He was another doctor.
And not another doctor, although some say he was Scottish, not English. Braid had heard about mesmeric performance, still mesmerism going around. This is around 1840. He had heard that there was this performer called La Fontaine who was doing mesmerism shows. Now, this is like one of the earliest known stage hypnosis shows.
Okay, that's cool.
And he'd bring people up from the audience. La Fontaine would trance them out and make all these things happen and cause them to become insensible to pain and so on. Braid went and saw it, thought it was bunk, but was kind of interested. They were still selling the magnetic currents idea. Braid had a patient staring at a lighted disc for an eye examination. Goes out.
Okay, because he was an eye doctor.
He was a general practitioner, I think.
Okay, so later after the show, he had a student who was staring at some light or whatever. A patient. He had gone out of the room, come back in.
Person's tranced out. Their blink reflex is gone. Their face is slack. They're in classic somnambulistic trance, which is the working state of hypnosis.
They might be hypnotized.
So Braid now gets closer to the mark. He says it's nothing to do with these damnable magnetic currents. It must be eye fixation. Maybe, in fact, on the hands as they're moving, these currents.
So James Braid is the man responsible for the idea that you can hypnotize somebody by having them stare at one of those coins or spirals or spots.
He was halfway there.
Yeah.
It wasn't the eye fixation. It was attention fixation. You don't have to fixate the eyes at all.
It's just any kind of attention.
He got us another step closer to the truth. And interestingly, Braid is known for a number of things, apparently for creating the word hypnotism and hypnosis, meaning nervous sleep, which is what he thought it was. Then he changed it to monoideism, which is wrapping your mind around a single idea. Then he talked about neuropnology. He didn't want to use hypnotism when he found out it wasn't nervous sleep. But Braid did not discover this term. He was beaten to the punch by 20 years by a Frenchman, Félix Étienne Dainan de Cuvier. And he was the actual one.
You just said that with no notes in front of you. I just want to point out for all listeners, there are no notes in front of Mike with that word on it anywhere.
It was a name.
Yeah.
Anyway, he came up with the term hypnotism and hypnosis first. Braid got the credit. He may have come up with it on his own. So Braid advanced everything into much more of a sane model. And I have the book Braid on hypnotism, and it's actually a very good one. He documented also a lot of the stuff he was doing and did some incredible work with it, starting to get people into trances through fixated attention, as we do in our Architecture of Hypnosis course. When we teach the 19th century methods that are still valid, we show how to use eye fixation to create trance.
Of course. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Now, Chris, it leads us to number 4, Hippolyte Bernheim. Bernheim was a very interesting guy because he was a neurologist. So we have another scientist approaching this now.
And, of course, I'm going to take the opportunity to thank our friend Dean Lohman for giving me a hard copy of a Bernheim book in Las Vegas last week. So thank you to Dean. That was tremendous. Okay, back to you, Mike.
He's an immensely generous man. Dean, thank you for the Merlot and the Oregon Pinot Noir as well. So Bernheim, he's got a patient with bad sciatica, can't walk properly, resists all treatment, even though he is a neurologist. I'm saying neurologist, not urologist. So the nervous system.
Neurologist. Okay.
The patient goes to this guy, Lebo. Lebo is another neurologist. He's older than Bernheim. And Lebo does his mesmerism stuff on him, or his hypnotism, whatever you want to call it. Braid stuff was starting to come across to Bernheim, and then shortly after this, it works. His sciatica is cured. Bernheim thinks, what a liar. Like, there's no possible way. He checks, the patient is cured. So, being a true scientist, Bernheim follows the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of whether he likes it or not. He becomes friends with Lebo, studies with him. They partner together in Nancy, France, spelled Nancy, pronounced Nancy, and they begin working and doing amazing stuff entirely through direct suggestion and hypnosis. Now, this is a toss-up, Chris. I could have said we give the credit to Lebo, but Bernheim really took the ball and ran with it, way beyond what Lebo did. In fact, towards the end, Lebo was still talking about magnetic fluids and magnetizing glasses of water for children to drink.
Oh, my goodness.
So he was still not quite there. But he worked with Bernheim. They did great work and developed an immense rivalry with another man who did not make my list. Now, Bernheim's book, Suggestive Therapeutics, really well worth reading. I'll just say to our hypnotists who are listening, our hypnotic friends, Bernheim did exclusively direct suggestion in hypnosis. He didn't do abreaction. He was not regressing to cause. That wasn't happening yet.
No indirect work.
But he still got amazing results. So for those who would want to run down DSIH, it's still a powerful thing.
And DSIH, direct suggestion in hypnosis.
So Charcot, now in Salpêtrière. Salpêtrière was in Paris. And it was an entire region of 40 different buildings. It had become a place for widows and a place for street people and a place for mentally ill people. And what happened with Charcot was a brilliant, brilliant man. He was short. He had a big mustache that scared the crap out of people. He was a very powerful personality. And he learned to tone that down. In fact, he learned to get rid of the mustache as well because it was freaking people out too much. He took over Salpêtrière. Now, do you know where Salpêtrière got its name?
No.
It's from the English word saltpeter, comes from that.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
Saltpeter comes from it.
Potassium nitrate.
Potassium nitrate, one of the components of gunpowder.
Yep.
And they used to
Oxidizing
make it
agent.
from human waste and animal waste in Salpêtrière. It was a very smelly place.
Wow, I imagine it was.
They use it with graphite, which of course is carbon, and sulfur to make gunpowder.
Yeah.
So Salpêtrière, this remnant, this rundown area, Charcot, to his credit, took it over, even though he's not on my list. And he tried to revive mesmerism. Charcot believed that the entire subject was really hysterics. People were hysterical. So that's why it's not on my list. He started to go backwards to to mesmerism. He didn't do any mentalism, I know. And he started to think in terms of working only with female hysterics, he was played for a fool in a lot of ways. They learned how to play act and trick him, and this was obvious to others.
I think while we have so much time left, we should talk about more people who aren't on the list.
That's really good. Okay, let's talk about you.
All right.
You're not on my list. So you know what, Chris?
No, this is actually turning into a fascinating episode, Mike.
These are really key people.
I think
Bernheim
people who
and
are
Charcot fought with each other for about 20 years.
Hopefully people who are hypnotists and those who are just interested in the idea are going to find this really fun. All right, so who's next on the list?
Let's fast forward now to May of 1900 when Dave Elmen was born.
Dave Elmen.
Fargo is North Dakota?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Anyway, Dave Elmen, amazing because he really brought in the early foundation of regression work, going back, helping people abreact.
Hypnoanalysis.
But it was happening just after World War I. They were using it to de-traumatize soldiers and that. But Elmen took this and he ran with it. And for about 15, maybe 20 years, probably 15 years, he taught doctors and dentists exclusively. Now, Elmen was a hypnotic master. He learned it very early on. I believe his father had his pain relieved by a stage hypnotist when he had cancer. I'm not 100% sure on that. So Larry Elmen or Cheryl Elmen, if you're listening, feel free to correct me. But he had a knack for hypnosis at a very early age. And he did some amazing work with doctors and dentists, and he would teach these seminars. He really, in my mind, is one of the founding fathers of direct, authoritative hypnosis. I mean, the whole thing of make it happen, want it to happen, will it happen. He put the locus of change right back on the subject and would tell them what to do. You remember any of the things from the Elmen book, Hypnotherapy?
Well, so Dave Elmen wrote one book, but it is a masterful book, and it's hypnoanalysis, hypnosleep. I remember so many cool pieces of that book. It's a fantastic
with, gagging
book.
reflexes, and everything. He just would get people to cause.
And I remember that most importantly, Dave Elmen is the man who was responsible for the idea that to establish hypnosis, you need to establish selective thinking.
Brilliant, Chris. That is the point. And that, of course, is what Braid was doing, having them looking at this disc to the exclusion of all else, focusing their attention. They're establishing selective thinking, and they're bypassing the critical faculty by doing that, which is amazing stuff. Well, you know what? We're halfway through our list. Why don't we take a commercial break?
Okay, let's do the commercial break, and then we'll come back and finish.
Tonight on the Carl Smith Network.
David Sellars was an ordinary accountant, enjoying an ordinary and essentially nondescript life. He lived quietly in Owen Sound, Ontario, and spent his evenings working on his hobby, splitting cornflakes with a razor blade, while his chihuahua, Little White Balloon, watched in quiet, canine fascination. But as David split flake after flake and prepared to glue them into the scrapbook he had designed for that purpose, disaster lurked just around the corner. Little did David Sellars know, but in just a few moments, as he sat working and quietly listening to the Gus Grissom variety show on his small black and white television, he was about to be on time. On time for his appointment with destiny. Because what David Sellars didn't know was that an orbiting space shuttle had missed Cape Canaveral and was about to descend in a hideous, out-of-control attempt to land in his driveway. The shuttle missed its mark, and crashing through the brown paper and vinegar roof, drove into David Sellars' left testicle at near warp speed. Sellars went into shock, but despite the horrific injury, was able to send his dog, Little White Balloon, to get NASA to dispatch an emergency testicular reconsolidation team to his home in Owen Sound. Hours later, while David languished in the Huntsville, Alabama spacecraft-instigated injury hospital, his dog, Little White Balloon, happened to urinate on a cherry tree on the lawn in Jack Ruby Memorial Park. The tree burst into pink flowers, and at that very moment, David began to recover. Because everything changes when the lawn tree blooms.
I looked out of my room, I looked out of his room, and the lawn tree bloomed, yeah, the lawn tree blooms, and the lawn tree blooms, and the lawn tree blooms, and the lawn tree blooms, in the middle of June, with my dog White Balloon, with the little balloon, and the lawn tree.
The Lawn Tree blooms tonight at 11:23 p.m. on the Left Testicle Network.
All right, Mike, so we had just left off at Dave Elmen.
Now, remember,
Next.
those of you listening may disagree with my list. This is purely subjective. I could have picked another 10 or 20 people.
Absolutely.
But this is just, I'm saying why I think these are 10 greats, not maybe the 10 greatest of all time. I ran into the same thing when I posted my 10 favorite guitarists on Facebook. Outrage! How can you put Joe Bonamassa on the list? You know, why didn't you put Larry Carlton? It's like, okay,
guys, this is opinion, not fact.
That's right.
All right,
But
next
my
on the
opinions
list,
tend to be fact.
we have Gil Boyne. Boyne. We're going to accelerate here now.
Gil Boyne is one of the lesser known. Gil did great directive work. He took from the work of Dave Elmen. He was influenced by him, by Milton Erickson, and by Fritz Perls' Gestalt therapy. He did amazing stuff by combining parts therapy and Gestalt therapy with hypnosis. And his legacy is still kept alive today at gilboyne.com. Really nice guy. Wonderful man, and I've watched him work on video, and just phenomenal stuff. He used PGO spikes to get people in trance, did great work, and as a therapist, he belongs on the list.
All right, that's all we're going to say about Gil Boyne. Next on the list, we have Leslie Lecron.
Leslie Lecron was a man, not a woman. I had a friend whose name was Leslie, a guy, and he hated it, so he used to call himself Lester.
Oh, nice.
But,
okay.
It's still a good name.
Leslie Lecron.
Lecron is the father of
ideomotor
signaling,
signals,
where you can get an express train to the unconscious mind through finger signals or a pendulum, a Chevreul pendulum. And Lecron worked with David Cheek, MD. They did some phenomenal work in getting to the unconscious with people who were not in profound trances. And then we're back to James Hazelrigg and his tripendulum.
Right.
The swinging pendulum or the finger signals will get directly to the problem area without the person being in a deep trance. In fact, Bandler and Grignard, who we'll hear from later, in NLP, would use finger signals in the 6-step reframe without a formal hypnotic trance
because anything that assumes trance causes trance. Clark Hall, 1933, but we don't have him on the list.
He's not on the list.
So let's talk about him because he's not on the list. No, I'm kidding. All right, so yeah, there you go.
So Lecron, yeah, he belongs there for sure with David Cheek.
Okay, so now number 8 is a bit of a cheat because it is 2 people. We have Bandler and Grignard.
Now, Bandler and Grignard did some phenomenal work. John Grignard being a linguist, Bandler was a student at the time. They managed to unpack the work of Milton Erickson, Virginia Satir, and Fritz Perls, who again, Gil Boyne was influenced by Gestalt therapy, and they created neurolinguistic programming, which has a huge overlap with hypnosis because pretty well all NLP has built-in hypnosis happening just by default. It just occurs in it anyway. Now, Bandler and Grignard really did an amazing job in systematizing and deconstructing what people like Erickson were doing, so it became teachable. Instead of him just sitting there and, grumbling in his voice in his wheelchair and weird things
you had to have a structure, something to model.
Yeah, and they broke it down, especially
they were
with
brilliant
John Grignard
modelers.
A linguist. It's certainly one of my mentors. He did an amazing job with Bandler. They made Ericksonian hypnosis approachable for other hypnotists, which I think they definitely belong on the list.
Right. So, for example, things like those Ericksonian language pattern cards that
we have,
other people have too. None of that would exist if somebody, or those 2 folks, Bandler and Grignard, hadn't codified Erickson's work.
Yes, Chris, nice putting a nail in that coffin, which leads us to the man I still consider
the man himself,
greatest hypnotist of all time, Milton H. Erickson. Erickson was, one of my greatest treasures, Chris, and I'm a guy who's got a piece of Admiral Nelson's ship and a deck spike from the HMS Victory. I've got a piece of the Berlin Wall. I've got a lot of cool stuff. I've got an Angus Young sign and plate SG, but I also have a brick from Milton Erickson's house where he did hundreds and hundreds of hours of therapy, thousands.
Thanks to
our wonderful student and friend, David Fairweather.
Yes.
And it's got a plaque on it from Elizabeth Erickson. It's called A Piece of Hypnotic History. I have this on my desk.
It's pretty cool.
When I'm working on a project or studying, sometimes I'll just touch that brick.
I thought you were going to say sometimes if you have a client that's not working well, you just throw the brick at them.
Put them out with that. I carry it in my pocket. Anyway, Erickson, without a doubt, did more for hypnosis than anyone. He started extremely directive. Mm-hmm. And it's noteworthy that him and Elmen were both born in 1900, Elmen in May and Erickson in December. And they did not get along at all because Dave Elmen had made the mistake of contacting Milton Erickson, who was a psychiatrist, and telling him that he wanted to teach him about hypnosis. And Erickson was...
And I think at the time, Erickson really believed you needed to be a medical doctor of some sort to legitimately use hypnosis.
He was a psychoanalyst. Yeah. And, so a lot of his stuff was building rapport and building deep trances. His best subject was his best subject after 300 inductions. That comes from psychoanalysis. Elmen had the advantage of just going right for the hypnotic bag, as it were, and trancing people. We'll edit that out. Trancing people out. And so they were opposite sides of the same coin. But as you and I teach it with our neo-Ericksonian approach, it's a continuum. You can be more direct like Dave Elmen, Gil Boyne, Esther Brooks, or you can be more indirect. Like
if we'd never been blessed with Erickson's presence on this planet, we probably wouldn't have hypnosis through metaphor, nested loops, indirect suggestion,
And
all
look
the
at his
wonderful
collected
stuff.
papers, Chris, the 4 volumes, the stuff.
It's insane.
The research he did as a medical doctor, a
Mm-hmm.
psychiatrist, it was flawlessly done. And just amazing, amazing stuff. How he would just talk to people and they'd change, they'd be transformed. And so Milton Erickson is still my ideal. And that's why that brick is a great treasure. Michael C. Anthony, everybody wants me to leave them the brick in my will when I'm eventually dead. Anyway, he said he wants my Angus Young guitar.
And your
he
Milton
said, "And the
Erickson brick.
And then he wrote back a few minutes later and said,
Don't take
than later.
don't take too long.
Sooner rather than later. He's wishing me dead just to have the brick.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Which leads us to the last one on the list. And I put my dear, awesome friend, our friend, Michael C. Anthony on the list because in my way of thinking, I've seen Ravine, I've seen a lot of the great stage hypnotists. He was without a doubt the best stage hypnotist in the world, and there's reason to believe he might be the best one of all time. If you watch him work, it's his ability as an entertainer. Because the whole point of a hypnosis entertainer is to entertain. And because he brings his skill with magic and mentalism and just grabs people right away, I learned so much about presentation from him, about selling an effect, where something simple. I have an effect I do, Chris. I got it out of a kid's book. And it's basically this. A deck of cards is freely shuffled. It can be a borrowed deck. And you get the person to give you a number. So they say 15. You count 15 cards. They turn it over and say it's 5 of clubs. And you say, okay, no reason it shouldn't be a 5 of clubs out of the deck you shuffled. You say, right. You say, I wonder what the 15th card is from the bottom. I wonder if this card could tell us. Okay, it's probably not clubs, probably spades. And guess, I think it's the 8 of spades. They pick up the cards and count from the bottom, and it's the card you say.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's out of a kid's book.
So it's a simple trick to learn, I imagine.
Because
but the
of Michael
way you
C.
sell
Anthony,
it.
he's never done the effect. I've learned to sell it, and I've fooled really smart mentalists and hypnotists with this who haven't got a clue. I've never seen anyone see through
Okay,
this.
so it's all about the presentation.
Which is why we're bringing him to Toronto.
Absolutely.
I mean, don't get me wrong.
I'm so
learned
excited.
Absolutely nothing about hypnosis from the chap. Clear about that. All presentation. He's a great hypnotist, an excellent entertainer.
He's incredible. I have watched him do things like at the UK Hypnosis Convention in 2017.
He steals the show.
And he just, people are doing different card effects, and then he does something that is, I won't even describe it.
He just
it
jumps
was
in, and it's so freaking
masterful.
mind-blowing.
People are just going, how did you do that? It's,
and that's why we're bringing him to
Toronto.
Come to Toronto,
folks.
We're going to see him in England in November. Yeah.
So that pretty much wraps up our top 10 list of the greatest hypnotists of all time. And if you disagree with this list for any reason, feel free to email Mike at MikeMandelHypnosis.com. Give him a piece of your mind. Let him know how wrong he is.
And I shall feel free to ignore you. Chris, why don't you give us the empowering question?
All right, so today's empowering question for episode 132 is, what are the components of my own top 10 list? What are the top 10 important things or people in my life? And how does thinking about that affect me? So what are the components of my own top 10 list? What are the 10 most important things or people in my life? And how does thinking about that affect me?
Brilliant, Chris. Brilliant. Well, I will give the meta 5 for today. And this is called The Firefighter and the Potatoes.
Okay.
I live in a medium small house, but I do have a 5-car sized driveway with only one car. Consequently, living in the Great White North, Canada, we get a lot of snow. That's why it's called that. And I refuse to hire anyone. I shovel the snow myself, as you know, just at 66 years old, refusing to lie down and die. Well, a few years back, I was shoveling the snow in our driveway, and it was a bright sunny day. And my wife came out and was talking to me, and she was sort of, enjoying the weather. And it was that wonderful heavy snowfall that's a nightmare to move. And our neighbor, Helena, a neighbor at the time, she came out as well. And she was talking to us. And a few minutes later, her live-in boyfriend, Doug, he came out too. And we were talking together. Doug is a firefighter. Mm-hmm. And he was, paramedic, all these things. Master class swimmer, ran the North Toronto swim team, master swim team. Really interesting guy. So the four of us stood there talking for maybe 15 minutes. And we're talking about the snow. And somebody brought out a bottle of ice wine, and which of course is great in Ontario. And we jammed it in a snowdrift. It got cold really fast, and we had a few little glasses. And we were passing these glasses around and drinking ice wine and looking at the snow and shoveling the snow. And then we noticed something really interesting, Chris. We noticed clouds of smoke pouring out the front door of their house around the storm door, which was shut. Their house was on fire.
Whoa.
We thought. And they freaked out and rushed inside, Doug getting there first because he's a firefighter. Helena had left a pot of potatoes on the stove, had come outside and had forgotten. Doug had followed her and forgotten, and they were on fire. The funny thing was, he screamed at her. She screamed at him. The smoke alarm didn't go off. He said, we would have heard it outside. She said it didn't go off. He climbed up in a chair and he said, well, there's no batteries in it. I don't think he ever recovered the jibes that we threw at him. A firefighter, a smoke alarm that doesn't work.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to Brain Software with Mike Mandel, and I'm Chris Thompson. Make sure you check out our website, MikeMandelHypnosis.com.
Come to Toronto.
You can get the Brain Software ebook on the homepage of the website, at least currently in its current design. And come to Toronto, check out our live events at MikeMandelHypnosis.com/events.
Or we'll see you in England in November.
You got it. All right, that's it for 132. That's a wrap. And good night.
Mr. Thompson, let me tell you the most remarkable story of Dennis Bryce Morgan in the game of chess.
No.
It's a wonderful thing. See, Bryce Morgan, around, I suppose it was 1918, the war was just about to close. We're all sick of being in the damn trenches of so much trench foot and white phosphorus coming down on us. And not enough wine, certainly not enough brandy for us. Wonderful thing. So I was sitting around and Bryce Morgan was playing chess against multiple people. He was a very, very good chess player. And he'd just beaten Johnny Leifin-Yotswo and Johnny Brookman-Dingty last year. And I think Johnny Suleiman-Classed Philo Aravantave tried to give him a good game, but was beaten in about 12 moves. He favoured the gambits, the Evans Gambit, the King's Gambit, and of course the centre-counter game. Wonderful player. But what he didn't know was there was someone of near master strength in the regiment, and that was Henry Squatter. Squatter had spent his life in chess clubs. He was a bit of a quiet fellow. He loved chess. And he decided he was going to play Bryce Morgan. But what he didn't know was that was the entire point. Bryce Morgan had been winning deliberately, and these other chaps had been losing deliberately, all to set Squatter up. And what Squatter didn't know was Bryce Morgan had taken the White King and he'd hollowed it out, and he'd filled it with some gelignite high explosives and fastened it all back together with some brown paper and vinegar, round it all up with wire, put it on the board, and Squatter naturally challenged him to a game. And they sat down, and Bryce Morgan says, I'm going to beat you, Henry Squatter. You're not the player you think you are. You know the way he used to talk. It was the funniest damn thing. Squatter said, I'm going to damn well beat you, Bryce Morgan. He picked up his king, played pawn to king 4, slammed it down. It exploded. It blew his hand off. He just sitting there with a stump. Oh, we were all in stitches laughing. He was 2 years in the infirmary after that. Funniest damn thing. As I loved about Bryce Morgan, just a great sense of humor, never mean-spirited.